Welcome back to our third session of the day, Stories of Travel and Encounter. And we're delighted to have as chair Professor Nayan, who teaches international relations at Ashoka University and was founding editor of Yale Global Online and was correspondent and editor of the Far Eastern Economic Review. He's the author of Bound Together: How Traders, Preachers, Adventurers, and Warriors Shaped Globalization, and Brother Enemy, The War After the War, and he's received the Shorstein Award for Journalism. So.
Good afternoon. I'm just trying to find. So we have a very powerful panel this afternoon to tell us all about travel and discovery. And this is, of course, the core of the program we're having today. So the first, I want to introduce the speakers in the order they would appear. Syed Ali Nadeem Rezavi is a professor of medieval University. He is the author of several publications, including Fatehpur Sikri Revisited. His research interests include the history and archaeology of medieval India and Mughal dynasty in particular. He has published more than 40 research papers in peer-reviewed journals. A former chairman and coordinator of CAS Department of History at Aligarh, he is presently the Secretary of the Indian History Congress. In 2007, he was the SOAS. He was at the SOAS as Charles Wallace Fellow, and in 2008, a visiting fellow at Maison des Sciences de l'Homme in Paris, and he is a research fellow at the Shia Institute of London. Next, Syed Akhtar Husain is a professor in the Center of Persian and Central Asian Studies, JNU, and president of Institute of Indo-Persian Studies. He has published articles in leading journals of Persian studies in India and abroad and has 2 books to his credit. He co-edited essays on Arabian Nights and revisiting Sadek Hedayat's Blind Owl, writings on a modern Persian novel. And to my left is Peter Ronald deSouza, Director of Indian Institute of Advanced Studies and former Director of Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, where he served 2 terms, 2007 to 2013, and then he was professor at Goa University till 2003, and professor and senior fellow at the Center for Study of Developing Studies in New Delhi. So he left New Delhi just 2 years ago. Now he is happily ensconced in Goa. His recent publications are in Hall of Mirrors, Reflections on Indian Democracy, Democratic Accommodations, Minorities in Contemporary India, and is co-editor. Keywords for India, co-editor. At Home with Democracy, A Political Theory of India, essays of D.L. Set, and Comparison to Indian Democracy, Resilience, Fragility, Ambivalence, and he is the co-editor of that publication. He lives in Goa and is curious about play up various imaginations of Goa in the making of the contemporary. And finally, Zoltàn Wilhelm. He's an old Delhiite. He lived here a total of 7 years. He obtained his master's degree in biology and geography with honors in 1994 at the University of Pécs, and in 1999 obtained the PhD degree. He habilitated in 2009 with his work, Regional Disparity in India. He is currently the director of Asia Center at the University of Pécs, and in 2015 and 2018 he was the director of the Hungarian Information and Cultural Center and the cultural counselor at the embassy in Hungary, New Delhi. He received one of the highest awards of Hungarian Geographical Society, the Alexander C. Csoma, the Karos Medal in 2022. So with that, let's open the floor for Professor Syed.
Well, dear friends, Professor Nayan Chanda in the chair, colleagues, friends, my seniors in the profession. I can see privileged enough to have Sanjay Saab here, Dalrymple ji, the others who are equally, their scholarship is well known. First of all, let me thank the organizers of the conference, especially K.N. Srivastav Saab, the director IIC, and Dr. Sudha Gopalakrishnan, executive director IIC, for approaching me for making this presentation. Let me confess that when I was approached and asked to present a paper on Alberuni in this panel entitled Stories of Travel and Encounter, I expressed my reservations to speak on this particular theme, as much has already been written on it. In fact, Sakhao's own introduction is quite comprehensive. And then we have Ainsley Embry's paper, An Outsider's View, Alberuni, published in Imaging India, edited by Mark Juergensmeer by Oxford University Press in 1989. Plus, that I myself had already contributed on it in 2020 in an edited volume, Alternative Arguments, Essays in honor of Surendra Gopal, which was an edited volume published by Primus. Instead, I suggested that I be allowed to talk about another such encounter writing, which would be more relevant today, the memoirs of the recently much maligned and misrepresented Zahiruddin Muhammad Babar, who, like Alberuni, was a scholar par excellence, but unlike him, a conqueror too. Anyhow, I was asked to introduce Alberuni's perceptions about India and its people and postpone the other topic for some future occasion. Let us at the outset point out that Alberuni regarded Hindus, that is within inverted commas, as excellent philosophers, and he felt strong inclination towards Hindu philosophy, but on the other hand, he was a Muslim and at times does not fail to point out the superiority of Islam over Brahmanic India. He attacks Arabs, but not Islam. Abu Rehan Alberuni came into contact with India, then popular as Hind, at the ripe age of 44 years, when he was forced to come here as a glorified prisoner in the company of Sultan Mahmud ibn Supugtagin, when the latter invaded the subcontinent in 1017 AD. He himself was a proud Khwarezmian, a territory now identified as Khiva. Khwarezm had itself been devastated by Mahmud, who before returning back to Ghazni had taken many prisoners of war with him. But it appears that in spite of being a prisoner, Alberuni had been given certain freedoms when he was made to march with the invading army of the man who had not so long ago first conquered Alberuni's own homeland. Thus, he does not particularly appear enamored by the great Sultan Mahmud, for whom he uses barest of words of praise. In the words of Sakhao, he was and I quote him, a political prisoner kept on honorable terms, unquote, and who was allowed to live in India between 1017 to 1030, that is when Mahmud died, and spend his time with, and I quote again, with no official inducement or encouragement or hope of reward, to carry on his study of the new civilization which the Ghaznavites had encountered. Although Tahqiq Ma'al Hind, popular as Kitabul Hind, was the first known scholarly study of the subcontinent, yet the Ghaznavite conquest was not the first encounter between political Islam and India. Sindh and parts of Punjab were already under the Fatimid rule, which was destabilized and broken by Mahmud's invasions. Thus, one has to remember that Alberuni's account of India and its people, that is Tahqiq Ma'al Hind, is not that of a conqueror, nor of the first Muslim contact with India, for an excellent account in the sense of an, but it is an account in the sense of an account of a, or in the sense of an account of a conqueror. For example, the Babarnama, also known as Tuzuk-e Babari, which I think would be a better choice to understand what the understanding of India, one civilization, by a conqueror would have been. Kitabul Hind, Alberuni's India, however, is the first dispassionate description of India by a foreigner. Greek accounts, perhaps, were the first accounts of people of a different civilization writing about India. Herodotus, Megasthenes, Xenophon, Arrian, Strabo, etc. were some of those who wrote about India, its people, its geography, and its mythologies. But all emphasize the exotic and the negative. For example, Herodotus in Book 3rd of his Histories mentions that most Indian tribes lived together like brute beasts, and that in Indian deserts there are, and I quote him, great ants in size somewhat less than dogs but bigger than foxes. These examples can be multiplied. In contrast, Alberuni wastes no time on the bizarre and fantastic, which had been the hallmark of the foreign perceptions so far. Ainsley Embry thus says that, and I quote him, no one has produced a book at once so objective, so learned, and so compassionate, and that no other work from the period remotely touches it in accuracy of observation and breadth of coverage. According to Embry, the concern with the strange and fantastic in another civilization is actually a device to avoid coming in terms with it. Alberuni had come to terms with it and had dug deep into what India was and who its people were, without much religious prejudice or the conqueror's perspective. K.M. Panikkar describes his work as a moment in world history. A proper understanding of Alberuni's study of Indian civilization can only be had if one keeps in mind the motive and purpose for which he wrote. As I had already mentioned, he was not approaching India from the position or pedestal of a conqueror. His homeland too had been very recently vanquished by the same armies which now he was accompanying. He was no mujahid or holy warrior. Perhaps as a fellow sufferer at the hands of Sultan Mahmud, having lost both his personal independence and of his homeland, he empathized with India and its people. Both had been ill-treated and by the same conqueror. He was a scientist, a munajjim, an astrologer, astronomer. And it is as such that he had gained his place in the Ghaznavite court. During the reign of Sultan Mahmud, when he gained his rightful independence, he wrote his book on the field to which he had dedicated his life, that is astronomy, a book called Al-Qanud al-Masudi. He specifically underlines his purpose both in the preface to his book as well as in the conclusion. He says that every knowledge which existed about India was, and I quote him, second hand, which one had copied from the other. And I once again quote him, never sifted by the sieve of critical examination. He further cites a master scholar of his time, Abu Sahel, who incited him to write down what he knew about Indians. Within inverted commas, I again quote Alberuni, as a help to those who want to discuss religious questions with them, that is, the Indians, and as a repertory of information to those who want to associate with them, unquote. In the very first para of the preface, he tells us that there are a number of types of reporters, akhbar, some who tell lies to promote their own interests, others who lie on the basis of personal likes and dislikes, still others who lie as they, by their very nature, can never speak truth. Then there are some who resort to lies as they blindly follow others, who tell them to lie. He then quotes the holy book, the Quran. You speak truth, even if it were against yourselves. My book, Kitabul Hind, he says, is nothing but a simple historic record of facts. He also stresses that his book is not a polemical one. In the concluding remarks to his book, he further writes, and I quote, "We think now that what we have related in this book will be sufficient for anyone who wants to converse with Hindus and to discuss with them questions of religion, science, or literature," and I emphasize, on the very basis of their civilization. If one reads his Kitabul Hind, he finds the Indians, he calls them Hindus because they are the inhabitants of Al-Hind, as excellent philosophers, good mathematicians, and astronomers. Being one himself, he, however, takes pride in his own knowledge, yet does cede that they knew their subject. He appreciates the mental achievements of the Indian scientists and goes at length to read and understand their work. His book is full of words of appreciation for those things which he found good, but does not fail to record things which he did not appreciate. Like Darashikoh, many centuries later, he believed in the Indian philosophy being monotheistic in nature, but which later on got contaminated. He writes, after interacting with his Brahmin interlocutors, that they too worshipped, he says, one sole Almighty God, in the initial stages. And I quote him, the first cause of idolatry was, this is what he says, the desire of commemorating the dead and consoling the living. But on this basis, it has developed and has finally become a foul and pernicious abuse. At one place, that is in volume 2 of his work, he talks of Indian scholars as enjoying the help of God. At another place, while discussing Brihat Samhita of Varaha Mihira, he talks of the author being guided by divine inspiration. He is not looking down the religion of the people about which he is writing. One more thing which one notes is that at places where he is critical of some Hindu practice, he justifies it by comparing it with pre-Islamic Arabs. He declares that the Arabs had also been as bad, if not worse. He simply does not outrightly condemn the Indians for those practices or thought which he found repugnant. At places where he finds things beyond justification, on such occasions, he just writes, and I quote, "To such things, silence is the only proper answer." Now, in this paper, which is quite long, I go on to discuss Alberuni's various views about the culture and society of the country. He talks about the caste system. He talks about the rigidity of the caste system. He tells us about the number of varnas which he encountered, but instead of narrating them verbatim here, because already all of us sitting here know about what Alberuni had to comment about the Indian society, I would only stress on the fact that Alberuni was in fact only reporting what was being reported to him by his Brahmins with whom he was talking. It was not the practical side of the story which he was narrating. Most of it was an idealized version which was being put before him by the Brahmins themselves. His own views, which are of more interest and directly of his own, are those which Alberuni makes about science and other matters about which he himself knew. Before I actually close, without going into all the details, I would also like to mention that perhaps Kitabul Hind is also one of the first of the books written about India, about Hindustan, where the concept of a subcontinent is described. He situates Al-Hind between the high mountain ranges on one side and the sea on the other. He says India is a land limited by the Indian Ocean in the south, with mountains and ranges on all the other three sides. Commenting on the nature of the soil, he mentions that it consists of rounded stones which are huge near the mountains, where the rivers have a violent current, but then there are stones of a smaller size at greater distances from the mountains, where streams flow more slowly, and the stones appear pulverized in the shape of sand, which all led him to conclude that, once again within quotations, India had once been a sea, which by degrees has been filled up by the alluvium of the streams. At one point of time, talking about the Indian scientific knowledge, he says that the Indian knowledge of science is just like a bucket full of, sometimes dung with pearls embedded within it. So I'm not saying that he doesn't have that superior feeling of a Muslim. He does. But then he is actually, nice enough that he also says that there are pearls within the Indian thought and sciences. Thank you very much.
Distinguished panel and very learned audience, I would begin my discourse on Ibn Battuta, the stone who gathered moss, by invoking some of the writings of Stephen Leacock, a Canadian writer who had, in his wisdom, proposed that somebody in the English department of English-speaking universities must rewrite all the English proverbs, and he found them all outdated, and he said that all those glitter is not gold. He said that not all that glitters is gold. Those who live in the stone house must not throw stones on others. He said that no, those who live in the stone house must throw fusillade of stones on others so that others may not come near your house. And then he said that the rolling stone gathers no moss. He said, no, it is the rolling stone that gathers moss. My rolling stone is, of course, Ibn Battuta, and I would like to share with the learned audience that how much moss he gathered during his course of journey. Ibn Battuta was perhaps 21 years old in his hometown Tangier or Tangier, and he never had any inkling that he would be a globe trotter or a world traveler. As a simple man, he decided to go for the pilgrimage. But what, in fact, fired his imagination, or what urged him to undertake the journey of the pilgrimage, going to Mecca from Tangier or Tangier, was a very difficult idea, in the sense that those days it was very difficult to travel from one place to another place because of the perils of journey. However, when he reached Mecca, taking a very circuitous road, and there he stayed for 2 or 3 years after performing the Hajj. And Hajj was such a ritual in Islamic theology that once a man of means must perform Hajj in order to have a wider interaction with Muslim brotherhood. Perhaps it being the center of the world, where all the Muslims congregated once in a year, they must have exchanged ideas, and they must have shared their own experiences and carried tales from their own towns and cities. Perhaps there he must have got the idea of undertaking a long journey or traveling to India. India was, of course, his immediate destination, but again he did not come to India so easily. Now, this imagination of journey is such a noble thought, I would say, is such a graceful thought, that it dawns upon not everyone, but to few chosen people. Because in the Quran it is said that God himself says that I have laid the earth as a carpet and man as a traveler to walk on the carpet from end to end. It was a beautiful words which must have had a very beneficial and benign impact on Ibn Battuta, and thus he carried forward his journey. And fortunately or unfortunately, whatever journey he had recorded, it was lost on his way. But when he returned back later to his hometown, he had to dictate his own travels to a writer who was a renowned writer of Iberian Peninsula, Grenada, whose name was Juzay, who recorded everything what Ibn Battuta told him. But before I go back to that part of the story, I would like to emphasize that how and why people take such long and perilous journey. Ghalib, in one of her beautiful couplets, he says about the world and man. And Mirza Ghalib being Mirza Ghalib, there he says that one passionate step opened all the chapters on opportunities. A road led to the wilderness of all the parts of the two worlds. So it is the passionate step, what the Chinese says, that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, or what the singer has sung in a beautiful voice, "ऐ जज़्बे दिलगर मैं चाहूँ हर चीज़ मुकाबिल आ जाए, मंजिल की तरफ दो गाम चलूँ और सामने मंजिल आ जाए." So that was the idea which must have gripped Ibn Battuta, and he had travelled all the way from Tangier to Mecca, and then from Mecca to the Ottoman Empire, and from Ottoman Empire he made his road to India. When he came to India, the monarch who was ruling over India was Muhammad bin Tughlaq, a very controversial, lunatic monarch. Nadeem Rezavi knows him better than myself, being a student of literature. He being a professor of history, he must be knowing about Muhammad bin Tughlaq better than me. But one thing, what I understand, that Ibn Battuta was never a traveler of the ordinary men. The company in which he associated himself was the company of kings and princes and of elite class. He did not move among the commoners. During his stay in Mecca, he had learned, of course, Arabic was his language, but besides Arabic, he had learned another two languages. One was Persian and the other was Turkic, not Turkish, Turkic, because that was the language which was spoken in some parts of the Central Asian world. When he came here, he talked in Persian language, and he was appointed Qazi, that is a judge. But again, judge of which jurisprudence? Because there are 4 jurisprudences in Islam. One is Hanafi order, then the Maliki order, then the Shafi'i, and so many 4. He belonged to the Maliki because in Maghrib, the Maliki school of thought was practiced, so he was made a judge of Maliki order. He enjoyed the favor of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and so much so that Muhammad bin Tughlaq had granted him 5 or 7 villages of Delhi. Delhi being a city of villages also. You had a main town in the city, Jahanpana, and in and around Jahanpana there were so many villages. For example, Muniraka village, or perhaps Lodhi Garden would have been also one of the villages in and around, I believe so. So he was the owner of 5 or 7 villages, and he was given the revenue in the form of food and rice as revenue, and he enjoyed his life somewhat comfortably here in Delhi. Now, what went wrong during his stay in Delhi was that he was in close companionship with a Sufi whose name was Sheikh Shahabuddin. This Shahabuddin was also a Sufi. I was told that he married the daughter of Shahabuddin, a man of Iranian origin. Perhaps Muhammad bin Tughlaq was sensing some sort of seditious activities on the part of Shahabuddin and ordered his execution, and he fell from the grace of the monarch, and he was in prison for some days, for some months, and reading the Quran from cover to cover, fasting, offering his prayers for release. Finally, one fine morning, he was released and he was made ambassador of Muhammad bin Tughlaq to China. On his way to China, he went to, when he was coming to India or going for Hajj, he came in contact with Al-Murshidi, a man who was a Sufi in Egypt. This man had prophesied that you are going to India, a brother of mine who would help you whenever you will be in danger. So he was in danger when he was going on his mission to China. When he was in a mission to China, perhaps in Aligarh, which was known at that time Coal. So there the Hindu robbers robbed him of all his belongings, and he was again having a very hard times. So Dilshad was there who saved him. Afterwards he came to Bengal. When he went to Bengal, the part of that Safarnama, or his Safarnama is also, we know it by the name of Rehla. But in fact, Rehla is a generic name. The name of his Safarnama is Tuhfatun Nazar fi Gharaibul Amsal wal Ajaibul Asfar. It's a 1 meter name altogether, but it has a meaning. It is not like that. For in abbreviated form or in a generic name, we call it a Rehla, that is the travelogue. When he comes to Bengal, that is a very important chapter of discussion. Bengal being again a very important state of India, but it was cut off. It is not in the main land. Bengal is located in the eastern part of India. There in Bengal, the most amusing thing which he talks about is indeed very important for us, because Bengal was divided into 3 parts at that time: Sonargaon, Sadgaon, and Lakhnauti. So he was there in Sadgaon. Now Sadgaon, for Arab it was very difficult to pronounce the nasal sound. For example, Gaon, Gurgaon, Sadgaon. So he could not record the name properly as Sadgaon, but we can decipher that he was at Sadgaon. Sadgaon presented a very pleasant picture before him. Now the words which he is using for Bengal is again very close to my heart. And what he said about Bengal at that time is still relevant today. What he talks about Bengal is, he doesn't say that I say about Bengal. He says the people of Khorasan say about Bengal, Dozakh ast pur nemat, that is hell replete with all benefits. It is a hell, but having all the benefits, where the pauper can also survive. Today also, if you go to Bengal, you can see that there is no inflation rate as you can compare it with other parts of other metropolitan cities of India or presidency towns of India. Even today, Bengal is, or Calcutta is considered to be a Garib Nawaz Shahar, a state of the poor. The poor people can live there. There he gives us a beautiful account of economy of Bengal, that how much, what thing cost what. Now he talks about that for dinar, there were two types of dinar. One was the silver dinar and the other was the golden dinar. So in 1 dinar, one could have 25 rithals of rice. And in 3 dinars, one can have a milch cow. Again, and dirham is again a shorter denomination. In 8 dirhams, one can have a poultry. And at 2 dirhams, one can have a fat ram. And again, at 4 dinars, one could buy a rithal of sugar. And at 4 dinars, one the 10th of Muharram Ashura. Now, he talks about the political scenario which was prevailing there. Now, the story of Bughra Khan and Muizzuddin was very old at that time, because by the time Amir Khusro had died, already I think so 100 years must have passed by. And when the king of Delhi, he wanted to fight with his father, who was the governor of Bengal, Bughra Khan, they concluded a peace at river Sarju. And Amir Khusro had composed a beautiful poem known as Qiran-us-Sa'dain, which celebrated the peace sued between the father and the son. Now, that story was so rife in Bengal, it was so much often quoted in Bengal, that Ibn Battuta, having visited about 100 years back during the time of Fakhruddin Mubarak Shah, who was an independent king, so he also alludes to this story of Bughra Khan and Muizzuddin, which was there. Now, the king who was ruling Bengal at that time, Bengal being a disconnected entity, but the only language which connected Bengal with the rest of Asia was, of course, not Sanskrit, it was Persian language. And this has been for the first time pointed out by Ibn Battuta, that Persian was the language which was spoken wide across the Asian continent altogether, up to China, because he was made to memorize a beautiful couplet of Sadi when he was in China. The king, he was sitting perhaps in one of the assemblies of the king, and the dancing girl was singing the song of Sadi at that time. Sadi, who was an eminent poet of Persia, and his song was being sung there in Khan Baligh, which is known as Peking, and the king ordered him to, you must memorize this song. I would like to just give you the translation of that song, just to have a change of this monolithic discourse. There it talks about, as long as the couplet is of course laden with spiritual overtones. It is not somewhat mundane, but quite profane. As long as I avoid reading Persian, I will be reading just the English translation of it. As long as I have given my heart to your love, I remain in the ocean of thought. When I stand in prostration before you, I discover you in the recess of mosque. So there you could see that Ibn Battuta is humming. This was the only couplet which he had memorized in his long journey of more than 20 years. Now, I would like, because the time is running out, so I would be just trying to tell you about a few literary aspects of this Safarnama or Ar-Rahla, where there are beautiful similes which he has used. For example, when he was leaving Tangier and when he was departing for Makkah to perform Hajj, and he never knew that he would be leaving for such a long period, the way he tried to put down, he couched the language in which he was abandoning his house. He says that I am leaving my house as the birds abandon their nest. Just see the simile which he is using there. Again, his travel to Baghdad is quite somber at places, because Baghdad was a place which was sacked by the Mongols at that time, and when Baghdad was sacked by the Mongols, what happened? It was completely in ruins. The mosques were in ruins and all the places were in bad shape. But when he talks about the way how the Tigris was moving, it was very beautiful. In the sense, he says that the Tigris is moving like in such a way that it creates the body of Iraq is carved in such a way, leaving the two breasts together, the east bank and the west bank. It's a very picturesque type of description which he gives. But by and large, when he returned back to Tangier after a long time, he had been to Spain also, Granada. He enjoyed the best of the company and best of the land. He had seen the good times and the bad times together. But what is most important is, there are two things which I would like to share at the end of this discourse, that Ibn Battuta, when he had written this wonderful book, Ar-Rihla, it was the first document which the Muslim rulers could read and understand and have some sort of understanding about the lands which they had never seen before. As far back as China, the other part of Africa, and the southern part of Europe, it covers 3 continents, and it covers such a vast mass of the earth. For the Muslim rulers, it was somewhat a surprise, a new addition of knowledge, and they could have some type of understanding of the world, so it worked as a bridging force. This is what the topic suggests, that the mobility and the making of Asia. It connected Asia with Africa and with Europe also in one way or the other. The last point which I would like to share with you is that there is no pride in a sense that he would degrade the rest of the world. For example, what Mark Twain has said, that the East is the East and the West is the West, and the twain shall never meet. There, Ibn Battuta doesn't take that stand. When he comes back to Tangier, the painting reminds me of Ibn Battuta here, though I would like to misappropriate this painting. It is done for some other purpose. There he says so beautifully, the West is the best. When he says the West, it means the west of Asia, that is Tangier, or that Maghrib. The West is the best of lands I can prove. The full moon is near to it, and the sun runs thither. Thank you very much.
Professor Chanda, colleagues and dear friends, I really should begin by expressing my anxiety, because after 7 wonderful presentations by scholars who have researched and written about areas in which they are intimately knowledgeable, I am a bit of an outlier. I don't have deep knowledge of the author or the book or the period or that geography of in which the book is written. So I asked myself the question, why should I, as a political scientist of the 21st century, read a meandering travelogue of the 16th century by a Portuguese traveler in Asia, which on my little laptop is 1900 pages. So if I set aside the kind of pretentious answer that I do it because I live a life of the mind, the correct answer, the short answer is I couldn't say no to Sudha Gopalakrishnan. And having said yes, I now have proceeded to establish why yes was the correct answer. I have spent several months reading the book and being fascinated by the book. And I found that Fernão Mendes Pinto, the author, the traveler, lived dangerous lives for 20 years, from 1537 to 1558. He was an ambassador, he was a slave, he was a soldier, he was a sailor, he was a navigator, a merchant, a pirate, and even for 2 years as a late Jesuit training to be a priest. Only after these 20 years does he return to Portugal and becomes a householder, and he dies in 1583. So let me begin my discussion by giving you some bland details about the book. It's a massive book. He spent 10 years writing it, from 1569 to 1578. And he ostensibly did it for his children, to sort of give them an account of the life history of an errant parent. After the completion of the book, the manuscript was in restricted circulation. It was not available. And he did so, as one scholar on the book writes, because of fear that the times were dangerous and that he'd written a book criticizing every institution sacred and profane of his country. Sounds familiar. After several years, when the existence of the manuscript had become available through letters of Jesuits and others, does the book which he's asked his family to give to this institution, Casa Pia de Penitentes, it gets published in 1614, which is nearly 31 years after he has died. And as soon as it is published, it becomes available for 6 years later in Spanish, 1620, French, Dutch, and German. In fact, it begins to have a major impact on the European public sphere. I have used the English translation, which is very readable. The book is 226 small chapters, and it takes you on a boat journey across South and Southeast Asia. It's an unrelenting adventure. Strange things happen to him. One suspects that magical realism as genre preceded Salman Rushdie and Garcia Marquez, because it's a tale of risk, of challenge, of pain, of hope, of suffering, of fear, of deception and discovery. One of the appreciations of the book is that books like his, in a sense, contributed to the Renaissance in Europe. This is something I'd place before you. I'm no scholar to be able to endorse this, but it's an important insight that travelogues like his gave to Europe a body of ideas which allowed them to map human differences in natural and historical terms. Earlier they were too inward-looking, as a Christian Europe as opposed to faithless Jews or heretical Muslims. But now these travelogues are opening up the world to them, and Mendes Pinto's work, even though he was no great thinker, contributed to this. Now, this is an appreciation of the book, on the one hand. On the other hand, Mendes Pinto has been described as being the greatest liar of them all. He wrote this fantastic story, and did he really experience all these things? But if you look at the book and you look at the 16th century in which it was written, such travelogues were not uncommon. Marco Polo preceded him, and travelers from Europe were moving right across Asia. I just came back from Hampi, and I found that there were Portuguese merchants in Hampi in the 16th century. Duarte Barbosa, Domingo Page, Ferdinand Nunes, and others. So they were out to make money, and Ferdinand Mendes Pinto was doing the same. And over time, his book has been compared to more serious scholarly works like that of João de Barros, the official historian of the Portuguese court, or Camões, who wrote this epic poem on the sea route to India. And even more recently, and I must mention this, his book has been compared to the works of Fernando Pessoa, who never traveled outside Portugal, who sat in Lisbon and wrote poems and wrote them under different pseudonyms. So he sort of is seen as a great modernist who has contributed to European modernity. I give these examples only to, in a sense, counter that argument that Pinto's work was fantasy and he is now being rehabilitated. And I say this as a scholar in the humanities and social sciences. The work must be taken seriously. But we still have to deal with the veracity question. How does one deal with the stories that he tells? As I said, it's a huge book and lots of stories. And I think my first response to that claim that Pinto's making it up, he never went to all the places he mentions, he borrowed accounts from others, he is casual in locating stories which actually occurred before, but the wrong time he's mentioned it. So these are valid concerns. But I think one must recognize that we're reading a travelogue of the 16th century, and to therefore demand of that travelogue the protocols of social sciences of the 20th century, 21st century may be a little unfair. To to provoke the audience, would call an epistemic arrogance. So, fortunately, a pushback is occurring. Pinto's work, I think, belongs to this wonderful genre of travel writing, and I place in that Kapuscinski's lovely travelogue on Africa, The Shadow of the Sun, from which I've learned enormously, Vikram Seth's travelogue in China, From Heaven's Lake, or Pico Iyer's Video Nights in Kathmandu, or even Shiva Naipal's North of South, an African journey. One finds in such travelogues vast amounts of material for the humanities and the social sciences. There's fiction, there's history, there's folk tales, there's comparative sociology, there's commentaries on politics, there's ethnology, etc. And I dare say it's damn good reading. You know, they write very well, and it's really interesting. So then how should one read this book? I see this book as an accumulation of numerous little episodes that describe the variety of human experiences. I don't want us to read more than this at a certain level. Describing the variety of human experiences, and also as a resource that raises larger questions that preoccupies us today, and larger questions for the humanities and social sciences. Let me give you an example. For example, when reading the book, I, as a political scientist of the 21st century, ask myself the question, why is torture so brutal, with the victim suffering slashed rims, condemned to shackles and necks around the leg? You think this is now he's writing of the 16th century. Pinto describes children found in a pitiable state among the goods confiscated from a defeated pirate, and I quote, and 9 little children between the ages of 6 and 8, who were all shackled, at the arms and legs, lying there in such a dreadful condition that it was pitiable to see, for there was nothing left of them but skin and bones. Reading about these children reminds one that one is probably reading about Gaza today. And when you ask these fundamental questions, one sometimes wonders today, particularly today, whether the Enlightenment and the promise of the Enlightenment, which we have all supported and developed and promoted and taught in our classrooms, was a false dawn. Why do victors in war destroy habitations, granaries, palaces, worships of the people they have vanquished? Why is religion such a powerful driver of hate, that the enemy must not just be defeated, but demolished and humiliated? These are questions that emerge from Peregrinaçao. And these are questions that I think are extremely valuable. But from Pinto's rich descriptions of his travels, I find things that are useful. Let me step aside from these hard questions and look at some of the other things that he offers. For example, he's talking on business and trade practices in China in chapter 97. And I quote, for instance, in the poultry line, let us say ducks. Some men are allowed to operate the egg hatcheries and the raising of ducklings for sale. Others specialize in raising the ducklings to maturity, for killing and selling them cured. Others deal in feathers only, and the entrails and giblets, others only in eggs. And the man engaged in any one single of these operations is not allowed to mix any other on pain of 30 strokes of a lash, a penalty for which there is no recourse either to appeal, protection, influence, or anything else. He says this in the pork business, he says this in the fish business, and this kind of description is not uncommon in the book. Now you'll wonder, why am I telling you the story? What's so great about the poultry business? I think from the story we can draw out a certain understanding of the state structure. An understanding which in the European context would be called the rationalizing imperative, that you would find, say, in the collected works of Max Weber. And in the European scholarship, this is presented as a European thing, that the rationalizing imperative emerged in Europe and then spread to the rest of the world which did not have it. In Mendes Pinto's book, it's there in China. And I'll give other examples. Now, I've just given you the example of trade. So in addition to such social observations, we also find delightful human interest stories. And I must tell you this one because it's really charming. It's on chapter 47 called The Unlucky Bride. Mendes Pinto's boat is suddenly chances upon 4 little boats that were escorting a bride to a rendezvous at a designated place with her prospective groom. Now, the ritual among the people, as he describes, was for the bride to travel with her entourage in festoon boats to meet her groom, who would come in other festoon boats to the designated spot. The people in the bride's boats that the Portuguese saw thought they had spotted the groom's boat and therefore sent the Portuguese boat salutations. We are coming. The Portuguese regarded these salutations as strange behavior, which they read as an attempt to deceive them. They thought them to be spies sent by an enemy fleet. The captain of the Portuguese ship asked all his sailors to hide. The bride, distressed that no greetings were coming from the groom ship or that no messenger had been sent to pay her respects, decided to break custom and make the first move by showing herself. She sent an uncle in a boat with a letter to the Portuguese ship, and she writes, If it were proper for me, a mere woman, to come and gaze upon thy countenance without sullying my reputation, believe me, I would fly swift as a hungry falcon, newly freed from its bonds, to kiss thy lingering feet. But now, my lord, since I have journeyed all the way from my father's house to meet thee here, it is up to thee to leave the vessel and come to mine, while I await thee but a shadowy substance that cannot come into being without seeing thee. For if thou should fail to come in the dark of night, who can say if in the light of day thou wilt find me among the living? So there is passages, wonderful passages like this in wonderful prose. The uncle goes with the letter and is arrested and thrown into the Portuguese dungeon. Now, the next day the groom's ship passes by, sees this Portuguese ship, sends its salutations, not knowing what has happened. And the Portuguese ship sails away, and as Mendes Pinto writes, with God's help, 3 days later they reach another port. In those days, God always helped the Europeans. Now, you have such vignettes right through the book, and you can draw from them a wonderful understanding of the human condition, almost Somerset Maugham kind of lesson that you can pick up. Because I'm a political scientist speaking, I have to draw out contemporary stories. I can't just be a historian of the 16th century. So when reading this book, I initially started reading this book, no idea what I was going to say. But as I a few hundred pages later, a storyline began to emerge, and that's what I'm going to present to you. There are 4 themes that these are briefly discussed. There are 4 themes that I think I could dilate upon in this presentation, and which I'll offer to you. There are many more that you can find, but these are the 4 that I think are enough for my presentation. The first is the insights into maritime history. Sanjay Subramaniam has done such a detailed account that I can just skip over that with a small footnote. The second is his reflections on the encounter of civilizations between Europe and Asia, a big topic which only political scientists dare to probably talk about. The third is, and this people don't do enough about this book, is the appreciation of the rich prose of his writing. He seems to have an aesthetician's eye. He writes with beautiful language, whether he's writing about monuments or battles or torture or greetings, or the literature is wonderful. And the fourth is the experience with Francis Xavier and the Jesuits with his view. That's to sort of legitimize by me here. The footnote that I want to add to what Sanjay Subramaniam said this morning in a hugely scholarly presentation is that Mendes Pinto's book should be read as an exercise in imperial mapping. It is mapping not just the route, but the coastlines, the rivers, the resources, the mines, the kingdoms, the people of the place. So you should see this book as almost as a primer for navigating the Asia of the 16th century. You also should see the book as telling you the story of the Portuguese in the 16th century, who come not just to trade, who come not just to sort of discover, but who also come because they're carrying religion with them. So there is this, religion appears through the book throughout. They're invoking God, they're thanking God, they're seeing, they're seeing the enemy as faithless, etc. And the enemy, incidentally, is always Islam. Sometimes China, but a lot of the battles are with Turkish pirates or Turkish fleets or Turkish the people who are supporting local kingdoms. And so again, a vivid description which I should this thing. He says that now there is a battle that is ensuing between the Portuguese and the Turkish fleet. And the Turkish leader of the fleet says to his sailors, I may not be saying it right, so please pardon me. La hila hila la Muhammad Rakul hala. He shouted 3 times for all to hear, O Muslimen, O righteous men who believe in the holy laws of Muhammad, how can you let yourself be conquered by these cowardly Christian dogs who have no more spirit than a bunch of white hens and bearded women? Go after them, for you have the sacred promise of the Book of Flowers, where the Prophet drafted the dervishes of the house of Mecca, gratified the dervishes of the house of Mecca with wondrous delights. He will do the same for you and me today if we bathe ourselves in the blood of these savage infidels. Hearing this, the Turkish fleet got charged up and attacked the Portuguese. Now the Portuguese captain, in like fashion, also exhorted his soldiers. O Christian brothers all, he shouted, if these people can take strength in the cursed faith of the devil to fight like that, then let us take faith in Christ our Lord, who died on the cross for us and who will never forsake us, no matter how great our sins. For after all, unlike those dirty dogs, we are his people and they are not. Now, there are texts like this throughout, and I think sometimes one must really engage with this clash of religions and what has become a bad word these days, the clash of civilizations, which is my second theme. Now, there is an observation made of the book, and it's an observation which has a lot of promise, that Mendes Pinto's book really does not carry the burden of later colonialism. There's no white man's burden. Mendes Pinto actually seems to think, again, as I said, I'm not a scholar of the book, but I'd place it before you, seems to think that the Chinese civilization is superior to the Europeans, and he gives examples of Europeans who are morally less, who are morally corrupted, and there are examples where the Chinese just cannot understand how these people are so morally corrupt. So there's an example where he talks in terms of where the Portuguese have just finished raiding an island which had a lot of tombs of saints. And when there's a hermit on the island, and the hermit is just astounded at the violence and the destruction that the Portuguese are creating on this island. So he condemns him to hell. He says, what you have done and plundered you will go to hell for your evil deeds. And then the Portuguese replies. And when Nuno Coelho replied by telling him to accept everything with patience because of what God in his holy law commanded, the hermit clapped his hand to his forehead in a gesture of amazement, shaking his head 5 or 6 times, smiling over what he heard. There is no doubt, he exclaimed, the hermit, that I now have something before me I never dreamed I would ever see or hear again. Inborn wickedness and feigned virtue all in one. That is to steal and to preach. How profoundly blind thou must be to rely with such confidence on thy fine words and spend the life committing such foul deeds. I wonder if God will jest with thee on the day of judgment. So this kind of moral judgment is there in the book. There are many other stories of stealing a boat, of the law, etc. And so if you take this line of argument seriously, you find in Peregrinaçao some suggestion, maybe even an argument, an embryonic argument, that Mendes Pinto sees the Chinese as a superior civilization to that of the Europeans who are stealing, plundering, destroying, etc. the white man's burden theme comes later, because perhaps this is a period of mercantile capitalism, and once industrial capital begins to drive France and and Europe itself has gone through its own transformations. This is a valuable theme which I think needs further looking at. The third theme I want to talk about is the literary flourish of the literature. Now, the literature is beautiful, and I've quoted some sections for it. The book has wonderful descriptions of storms, of monuments, of battles, grim accounts of torture, of prayer, of greetings. When he goes to the court of one of the kings, there's an elderly lady who says to him, "Please come, you are like the rain after a drought." You know, the language, the prose is almost poetic. And I have lots of quotations, but I don't have the time. And now, for example, he's going through the island of Sumatra, and he encounters, this is what he describes. "We also saw here what was for us a very unusual and strange looking animal that the natives call kakuestão, about the size of a big duck, deep black in color, covered with scales, a row of spines running down the back about the length of a quill pen, wings like a bat, the neck of a cobra, a horn on the head like a cockspur, and a very long greenish black tail of the same color as the large lizards that abound there. These creatures, which fly as though leaping through the air, live by hunting monkeys and other animals from the treetops." Now, you would think you're reading J.K. Rowling over here, but it's this kind of description of animals. Now, you could say, "Oh, this is this is an Orientalist mind," and this. I don't want to get into that debate. I just want to appreciate the prose, and it's wonderful. There's a linguistic beauty which seems to suggest that, at least in the translation, Mendes Pinto has a very there's an aesthetic eye with which he is writing. And now my final point, Francis Xavier and the Jesuits. Now, the Jesuits play an important role, as I said, for a while. Mendes Pinto joins the Jesuits, gives all the wealth he'd accumulated over his travels to the Jesuits, and after 2 years leaves, but the Jesuits don't return his money. They keep it. But Francis Xavier seems to inspire him. There are several chapters devoted to Francis Xavier's life, and the fact that Francis Xavier is busy, his primary objective is to convert people to Christianity. He is warmly welcomed by kings, he wins discussions with the clergy, he predicts victory in sea battles as if God has given him a clue that the Portuguese will win. I'll finish in 2 minutes, yeah. And he even does not allow him to interrupt his prayers. Now you will say to me, and I need to defend it, that on the one hand you're saying no white man's burden, on the other hand you're saying he wants to convert people. So are these not contradictory? Is there not some, if he wants to convert people, obviously the Christian religion is superior to the religion of the Chinese or the Muslims, etc. I would suggest, in a tentative answer, that this could be because he does not see the Christianity he brings as requiring a change in regimes. That it's easy for the king to become Christian and still perform and live within that rationalizing structure that is already in place. But this is for debate. Now, Francis Xavier, and I'll end on this last note, Francis Xavier has come to acquire certain status in the region, particularly in Goa, from where I come. His feast is the 3rd of December, and it's a pilgrimage. It's a pilgrimage site. Pilgrims from all over Goa, all over India, and maybe abroad, come to Goa to participate in the religious activities that precede the 3rd of December, the novenas. His relics are on display in a beautifully carved silver casket in the Church of Bon Jesus, not unlike the ones we see in the reliquary exhibition below. Goans describe him as a Goenche Sahib, a kind of the leader of Goa, mentor of Goa. In the current atmosphere, there are attempts to change this narrative, to divest him not just of the status of Goenche Sahib, but to question his conversion drive and what it has meant to Goa then and what it means to Goa today. It seems that I'm not the only one from the 21st century visiting the 16th century. Thank you. So, respected Chairman, Professor Chanda, dear professors at the dais, and leaders of the IIC, professors among you, and excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. So I would like to introduce myself. My name is Zoltàn Wilhelm. I'm from Hungary, and maybe it is visible on the screen that I'm from the University of Pécs of Hungary, which is one of the oldest universities in Central Europe, more than 650 years old. So that's why I chosen the slides in this design. So I would like to speak about a person, Alexander Csoma de Kőrös. In Hungarian, we call him Kőrösi Csoma Sándor. And for us, he is a role model. He's a torch in the dark. He's a national hero of us. And let us join him virtually on his long and very tough journey to India. So, as he told, I would like to quote him, "Our souls are possessed with an unquenchable desire to seek out truth." What was the truth for him? He started his long journey to find the roots of the ancient Hungarians in Asia. He never completed his mission, but on the other hand, he has given treasures for the science, the global science. In this slide, you can see a few portraits of Alexander Csoma de Kőrös, but in the middle one, that is the only authentic portrait drawn by or painted by Ágost Söft, who visited him in Bengal, in Kolkata, in his last years. Let me say a few words about his childhood. There is a living debate on the date of birth of Alexander Csoma de Kőrös, but we must accept that he was born in 1784, and in a small village in Transylvania, nowadays Romania, so that's why you can see two different names on the slide, Kőrös in Hungarian and Csirus in Romanian. And his parents were Hungarians, so we call Székely people. Sometimes we can read Székely people in different works. And we have clear data on that when he was Christian in a Calvinist church in Kőrös. And of course, he went to the primary school in his own village, and he was extremely talented pupil of this small school. If you try to find this place in the maps, you will find it, you know, at the curve of the Carpathians, which is one of the coldest place in the Carpathian Basin. And this type of experiences helped him to survive in Tibet later, because, you know, the temperature can drop to minus 30, 40 on the centigrade, I mean Celsius. That was a very tough physical environment, but he prepared himself not only mentally for his mission, but physically too. And since 1904, the place called Csoma Kőrös as an honor to Alexander Csoma de Kőrös. So, yes, in this slide you can see that what I spoken.
So Csoma Kőrösi is in the curve of the carpets, and that is, of course, a very nice place for living. So nowadays, a lot of Hungarians try to purchase some properties there because it's a wonderful place, untouched physical environment, and so on. So let us see the next milestone in his life. So he became a student at the Bethlen College in Nagyenyed, now is in Romania. So he wasn't a very poor person. I mean, he didn't came from a poor family, but of course he wasn't a rich person. So that's why he became so-called a servant student in his college. Of course, he acted as a servant to the most wealthy fellow students of him. So he got, the food and everything for free. And sometimes he went to teach the poor people countryside. So that was a kind of volunteering from his side. So he become acquainted with the history text of György Prey and Ézsaiás Budai, which said that the Uyghurs and the Magyars, Hungarians, are related. So it is in Nagyenyed, or it was in Nagyenyed, in this college, that the first seeds of the plan to travel to Asia to look for the ancient Hungarian homeland are planted. So he met these type of ideas there in his college, the Bethlen College, and he decided that he would like to find the ancient homeland of the Hungarians in the heart of Asia. And you can see a few photos on this college, which still operates in Romania, Nagyenyed nowadays. It's a Protestant college. So as a Protestant student, he got a scholarship to abroad. But before that, of course, he passed his exams with great success, and then he tried to learn different languages to prepare himself for the great journey. For example, the Latin and Greek, and of course the ancient Greek and the other living languages, for example, French, German, Romanian, Slavic languages, and later, of course, English. So he was a language genius. And as I told you, he was an extremely talented student. So that's why he could get scholarships. For example, a scholarship from the Prince of Transylvania. And under this scholarship, he was able to learn, for example, theology for 4 years, and history and philosophy for 3 years in the same college. But then he became a teacher of this college. And then, as he got this scholarship from the Prince of Transylvania, he traveled to Germany, and he got the passport, of course, and he went to Travemünde, Lübeck, and Hamburg, but he enrolled at the Göttingen University, where he was the student of some of the greatest scholars of that age. So became more deeply convinced that the ancient Hungarian homeland and the ethnic relatives should be sought in the heart of the inner Asia, in Jungaria. Nowadays, Jungaria is, part of China nowadays. several languages, local languages. So I think that was a great advantage to him. He could do the communication with the locals. You know, sometimes if they could recognize that he's a white man, for example, maybe his life would be in danger. So that was a very useful knowledge for him as a language genius. In 1822, accompanied by two French officials, one of the officials called Ventura, we can see his picture downstairs at the exhibition. He was an Orientalist, kind of Orientalist. So he arrived in Lahore in 1822, and of course he tried to set off towards Kashmir because he wanted to cross the Himalayas and reach Inner Asia. But in June and July, he faced that this journey across the Karakoram, originally to Yarkand or Jharkhand, will be or would be too dangerous and too expensive. So that's why he abandoned his idea and went back to Lahore. And luckily, he met a British government officer or employee, William Moorcroft, along the Himabs River, and accompanied by him, he returned back to Leh, because you know, this guy, this British officer, seen that this Hungarian person so encouraged to travel towards north. And of course, these times the big game or great game went on, and the Sikh empire, you know, there were wars and so on. So maybe the British think that, okay, this guy would be very useful for us to learn some. So that was the main reason he accepted this job. So in 1823, he went to Tibet and tried to learn the principles of Buddhism and, of course, the Tibetan language. He stayed for 16 months in Zangla. You know, it is 3,370 meters above sea level, very challenging conditions. Csoma has written that when he tried to make some heat in his cell, in his room, there was no any stove or something like that, just the open fire. And when he lit this fire, the room full of smoke. So that's why, of course, he tried to survive in this cold without any heating system or something like that. So after a very difficult stay in Tibet, he got a lot of information, and then in 1824 he went again to the Tibetan territories. And in Sabatu, when he arrived in Sabatu, where the British greet him with suspicion and restrict his movement, Captain Kennedy asked him to write a detailed account of his life and travels. So this document is the most important source we have on Alexander Csoma de Kőrös. This is a kind of CV. We don't have any other proper sources on his life. And then he visited Tibet 2 times again, the Western Himalayas. And as we can see through these photos, it's a barren land, and of course it's a very challenging to stay here for Westerners, but he could survive finally. He stayed in the citadel of Zangla, and he stayed in the citadel of Zangla, and later, of course, many scholars tried to follow him. For example, Ervin Baktai, who visited the place after Alexander de Csoma Kőrös as the first Hungarian, and he left some tables with information on Alexander Csoma de Kőrös. And nowadays, as Alexander Csoma de Kőrös connects the people and the culture, there are some good examples, because that is the citadel in Zangla, and a new Hungarian NGO formed to save this citadel. The name is Csoma's Room, because Ervin Baktai, who visited as the first Hungarian after Csoma the place, he carved on the wood that Csoma's Room, and that is a message for us. And this NGO renovated the whole citadel and started new social programs here, so the locals could benefit. After that, Alexander Csoma de Kőrös visited the place and worked here. And year by year, a lot of Hungarian volunteers come to this place to, for example, build up a new school, and they run social programs too. And the second and the third visits in Tibet, he compiled the Tibetan dictionary and grammar, prepared an English version of the Buddhist texts, and the glossary of the Buddhist terms, and compiled a great amount of material from various fields of Tibetan literature. And luckily, he became the librarian of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. So if you go to Kolkata, to the Park Street, you will meet our national hero Alexander Csoma de Kőrös. For example, they have the original Tibetan English dictionary. So he compiled this dictionary based on 30,000 words, for example. So then he published other Buddhist texts in English, and he decided to go a study tour in India to master Sanskrit and other Indian languages for a couple of years, but he planned to visit northern Bengal, Nepal and Sikkim, but for some reason he stopped in Titalia. There he learned Sanskrit and Bengali, and of course in those type of modest conditions what he used to live in Tibet. So in 1837 Csoma returned to Kolkata and also to his Tibetan studies. He would pursue them for the rest of his life. In these years he was visited by the painter Ágost Söft, who drew the only authentic portrait of him, what you can see on this slide. And of course, he didn't forget his original goal. So that's why in 1842, However, Csoma set off again. This time he intended to go to the Tibetan capital of Lhasa, and from there to northern China, the land of the Uyghurs or Uyghurs and Mongolians. He hoped to find some sources about the ancient Hungarians, or at least about the Uyghurs or Uyghurs in the library of the Dalai Lamas. In April, he arrived in Darjeeling in Sikkim, where he was stricken with a disease. Languishing with a severe fever for several days on 11th of April. In the early morning, he succumbed to the malaria and had caught in the subtropical jungle of the Terai, as you know very well that place, forever ending his long journey. His monument stands, his tombstone or monument stone or memorial stone stands in the cemetery of Darjeeling on the slopes of the Himalayas. And let me show you a few photos about you know the Csoma cult, what we have. For example, I have photos from my city, which is the Csoma statue in my city on a yak. He was riding on a yak, of course. And another statue from the Geographical Museum of Erd. And at the Asiatic Society, he has a memorial room. You can see the room on the in these slides from 2016, and he has a bust in the whole of the Asiatic Society. And State of Hungary renovated this memorial room. You can see that when State of Secretary or Secretary of State, inaugurating this memorial room. And in Darjeeling, they named that road where this former English cemetery is situated, called Alexander Csoma de Kőrösi Avenue. You can see his tombstone in this picture, and it became his grave became a pilgrimage site for the Hungarians. So thousands of Hungarians visit that place. For example, in this picture are the members of the University of Pécs, 650 remembrance expedition at the memorial of Alexander Csoma de Kőrösi in Darjeeling in 2016. And there are other memorial places in Darjeeling inaugurated by the speakers or speaker of our parliament, for example. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you so much.
Well, it was a very rich offering, but the price of rich offering is that you don't have too much time to ask questions. But as chair, I claim the privilege of asking one question to Professor Husain. I remember reading that Ibn Battuta was appointed ambassador to China, and he went to Cochin to take his boat, and the boat promptly sank in the harbor, and so his travel to China was cancelled. Now, when he went to China later on, was he accredited again as ambassador or no?
Yes, he was accredited ambassador to China, and he went from Bengal, from Aligarh to Bengal by sea, and then from there to Samutra. But the purpose of visiting the place, which is known as Sadgaon, in fact, was to meet the Saint Shah Jalal, after whose name the airport in Dhaka, it is named Shah Jalal. And then from there, Shah Jalal had told him that he had offered him a coat, and he also told his followers that a stranger would come and you receive him at Sadgaon. So he was received there, not at Sadgaon, at Sylhet, what we call. From Sylhet, the coat was offered to him, and he said that this coat would be taken away by somebody in China. Then as an ambassador he went to China, and he was also at the seaport of Zhanghao. The king was there. The king offered him the entire privilege of being an ambassador, and his coat was taken in return. So the prediction, he believed in some sort of Sufism, and it appeared that it was all ordained beforehand. This is what the narrative of Ar-Rihla suggests.
So any, yes, please. Sure. Yeah.
Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. You talked about Savathu. Savathu being my native place, I'm so excited to know about it. That is there any detailed description about where he stayed in Savathu? And number two, he wrote his about his life and activities. Did he write in Savathu or after his stay in Savathu?
Unfortunately, we don't have any concrete evidence that in which place he stayed in Savathu. Savathu is very important for us because he had to write this CV kind of writing to the Captain Kennedy, who asked him, he forced him, asked is not the proper word. But if you come to Hungary, for example, you will find more than 200 Alexander Csoma Kőrösi streets, for example, and several statues. But unfortunately, of course, these type of remote areas, we have a very limited access to do the research, and of course mark the places where he lived and worked.
Professor Sanjay. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I had a question for Peter deSouza. As you rightly pointed out, there is a gap of about 30 plus years between the death of Fenomenus Pinto and the publication of the text. Now, the problem is we don't have a manuscript. We only have that published text. We know that there were several manuscripts in circulation because some Spanish authors cite it in the interim. Now, there's a distinct possibility that someone or more than one person reworked the text quite substantially. And the clearest indication of it is we have 3 or 4 letters of Fenomenus Pinto, which are actually his manuscript letters. And there's a distinct difference in the style between the letters and this text. So my question is, if this was indeed the case, right, from your perspective, does it really make a difference?
Thank you for that. I mean, you are the expert on the archive. So I mean, I have come across those 3 letters which have been published by the Jesuits, and I mean, I think the point you make that there's a difference in style. I would take the position you're offering, which is they would make a minor difference to this huge volume, assuming that there are several authors who have interfered with the text. In fact, the text that I have read by Rebecca Katz it reads like a very modern text because it's written in English and it's written with, using a sort of syntax which is very accessible. It doesn't look like a 16th century text. What is important for me is the fact that this text contains 2 levels of stories. One is the stories about the human condition, the little episodes, vignettes that you read about aspiration, hope, pain, whatever, which I think is very rich because it, in a sense, allows you to see existential spaces outside the world in which you are located. And the second is the insights into the social life and the institutional life, the social life, the institutional life,
and the religious life of these places. Now, if it is true that his text borrowed from other travelogues, oral and written, then that text also gets transformed through interventions by others. So I would, it's a risky position to take, but I'll take it. I would say it doesn't matter very much, because I think the richness of what is offered is to me the substance of my analysis.
Yeah. Well, I just want to make a very brief, comment. My friend Akhtar Husain Sahab spoke about Ibn Battuta and his account about India. I just wanted to add one more thing. Perhaps naturally none of us got the full time to discuss our papers. Now, Ibn Battuta perhaps is one of the first who also tells us about the various festivals and cultural activities which take place. And incidentally, I would like to inform you that he chooses 4 festivals out of all the Indian festivals to note down in his Rehla: Holi, Diwali, Muharram, and the birthday of the Prophet. These are the 4 festivals which he mentions. So and then he not only mentions them, but what type of festivities go into those. He also describes them. What happens in India, in Delhi, how do they celebrate them, is described. So that's a very important piece of information. Now, I would like also to add, with your permission, because I was the one who spoke the least. During the period of Alberuni, when Alberuni was in India, he, as I told you, that Alberuni came here along with the conqueror Sultan Mahmud. That is how we know Sultan Mahmud. Now, there is a coin which was minted in Lahore and which survives. It was minted in 1028. And I'll just read out how both the sides of the coins are worded. On one side, La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah Yaminud Dawla wa Aminul Millat Mahmud. That is, there is no God but Allah. Muhammad is his messenger, protector of the and custodian and protector of the state is Mahmud. Now, on the other side, there is a Sanskrit translation of the same. We are talking about 2 civilizations meeting each other. Now, it is very important to see how the translation of this simple thing was given. Avyaktam ekam Muhammada avatara niprati Mahmuda. The invisible is one. Muhammad is his manifestation, avatar. Now, there it was the Prophet, Rasul. Here it is the Indian language, avatar. And the king is Mahmud. So, here we find in this particular coin, just like Alberuni, trying to understand the situation, even an invader like Mahmud trying to, accommodate the beliefs of both the places. Thank you.
For Mr. Rezavi, you briefly mentioned that Babur had much in common with Alberuni. That makes me very curious. Where was the sympathy, empathy for the locals, and is it justified that he was by far the most brutal of all the conquerors?
Well, all conquerors are brutal. There is, I don't think anyone would disagree with the fact that If you are a conqueror, then you are going to make a killing. There is no doubt about it, whether it is Ashoka or Babur or Aurangzeb. The only thing is that, if you read Baburnama, just like Alberuni, where he is explaining the entire country, the geography of the country, the first section of Baburnama, when he describes Hindustan, is a gazetteer of the Hindustan, where he is mentioning not only the people, the places, the towns, the customs, but also the fauna and flora. And in each of these descriptions, there is no prejudice. Now, I'll give you just one example. I mean, Sanjay ji is sitting here. I mean, how dare I speak before him? He is standing before the Gwalior Palace. And what does he do? He admires it. And this admiration is not just verbal. He recruits 30,000 artisans and craftsmen and employs them and starts asking them to make his own, structures. The way he keeps on discussing the various classes of people, for example, the description which he gives of the Jat community itself. I mean, all of that shows, I'm not denying that he is not a conqueror. He is a man in Central Asia. He used to play polo with the head of the dead soldiers. So he is that type of a person. But he does that in Central Asia, he does that when he comes to India. He is basically a conqueror. In 21st century, what we are trying to do is that we are assigning religions to these conquerors, and I'm just arguing, please don't do that.
Yeah. Last thing.
मेरा सवाल सैयद अख्तर हुसैन साहब के लिए है। इजाज़त है उर्दू हिंदी में बोलने की? जी, समझ में आ जाएगा। तो मेरी दिलचस्पी इब्न बतूता में तांजीर में जब मैं घूम रहा था कुछ बरस पहले, उनकी कब्र को ढूंढते हुए हुई, और उनकी कब्र में मैं गया। ऐसा लगता है पुरानी दिल्ली में आप जा रहे हों, छोटी छोटी गलियां हैं, और उनकी पीढ़ी के 10वीं पीढ़ी के नौजवान से मेरी मुलाकात हुई। ज़िक्र आता है, मेरा सवाल अब है, ज़िक्र आता है कि दिल्ली के बादशाह मोहम्मद तुगलक उनसे नाराज़ हो गए थे और उनको कहा कि आप उनको रियासत बदर कर दिया इब्न बतूता को। ये कहते हैं कि वो दिल्ली के आसपास किन्हीं गारों में जाके छुपे थे। क्या हमें पता है, तवारीख़ के किसी सफ़े में दर्ज है कि वो किस जगह है, गुड़गांव में जाके रुके थे, फरीदाबाद में जाके रुके थे, किस जंगल में रुके थे वो?
एक ज़माना गुज़र जाने के बाद नक़ूश मिट जाते हैं, और जहाँ तक इब्न बतूता का ताल्लुक़ है, आज सिर्फ़ हम इतना जान पाते हैं कि जहान पनाह के नाम से एक बहुत बड़ी जगह तुगलकाबाद में आबाद है, जहाँ मोहम्मद बिन तुगलक का दरबार सजता था, और अगर बहुत ज़्यादा 5, 6, 7 गांव उनको दिए गए थे। हमें इसका भी पता नहीं है कि वो 5, 6, 7 गांव कौन से हैं, क्योंकि दिल्ली में एक गांव तो है नहीं। आज भी मुनिरका गांव है, फलां गांव है, खेल गांव है, ना जाने कितने गांव होंगे, हज़ारों और लाखों गांव होंगे। तो इस तरह से माजी के नक़ूश को ढूंढना, ये काम आर्कियोलॉजिकल सर्वे ऑफ इंडिया का है, जो बहुत ही बुरी तरह से वो नाकाम हो रहे हैं। ये तो सर सैयद की मेहरबानी है कि उन्होंने आसारुस सनादीद जैसी किताब लिख डाली है, जिससे हमें फिर भी कुछ हवाले मिल जाते हैं, कुछ निशानदेही हो जाती है, और कुछ चीज़ें बाकी है। वगरना इस तरह की चीज़ों को ढूंढना मेरे ख़्याल से किसी के पास अगर ज़ौक़ और शौक़ होगा वो ही कर पाएगा, और कोई सरकारी मुलाजिम का ये काम अब नहीं रहा है, और इसका पता लगाना भी बहुत मुश्किल है।
Well, I think we have gone well past our hour, but it shows how interesting it was, and thank you all very much for staying on and asking very interesting questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Chandu, and to all our speakers. Now, may I request Dr. Gopalakrishnan to honor our guests and our chair. Wonderful.
Chanda, please.